Well, what does it mean to be a Christian man? True Christian manhood is depicted for us in the life of Jesus. Remarkably enough, there is not a single descriptive detail about the appearance of Jesus in the New Testament. We don't know if Jesus was short or tall. We don't know if he was fat or thin. We don't know if Jesus was light-skinned or dark. We don't know if Jesus had long hair, although I think he probably had no hair. The absence of any descriptive detail about the physical appearance of Jesus has allowed a proliferation of portraits of Jesus, each of which seems to highlight the cultural ideals of that particular society. I have a wonderful poster in my office that has a picture of the African Jesus, the Chinese Jesus, the Native American Jesus. Every single culture seems to have its own ideal picture of what Jesus looks like. And for some reason, we have this Sunday school picture of Jesus as a Western European male with brown hair and blue eyes, relatively light-skinned and of slight frame. Well, I don't know what Jesus looked like myself, but I think I can say with pretty much confidence that he probably didn't have blue eyes, and he probably didn't have brown hair if he were from the Middle East. And I can say with confidence that Jesus was not a wimp. First of all, we know that Jesus was an artisan. He's one who worked with his hands. He was someone who must have been physically fit to do the kind of work that he did. But we also know that there are two stories about Jesus in the New Testament that show Jesus' physical power. One comes in Luke chapter 4, just after Jesus has preached in his hometown synagogue in Nazareth. The crowd turns angry. They turn against Jesus. And the scripture says, Luke 4:28 following says, when the men of Nazareth heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But then the author says, Jesus passed through the midst of them and went on his way. Jesus just walked through this angry mob, and everyone let him go. Now that's power. And then you know the story of the temple cleansing incident. Jesus enters Jerusalem according to Mark. I'll use Mark's version, Mark 11. Jesus enters Jerusalem. And when he does, he entered the temple and began to drive out all those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. Now that's a tremendously powerful act, not only throwing things all over the place, but bringing in essence a halt to all of the activity that was taking place in the temple. Jesus wasn't a wimp. Jesus was powerful. And Jesus was recognized as a powerful presence during his life. But it wasn't only Jesus' physical presence that was powerful. Jesus' words and his deeds were powerful as well. According to the Gospel of Matthew, and I'm going to play with Matthew here for a few minutes. According to Matthew, Jesus had something that Matthew calls in Greek exousia, which is the Greek term for authority. Jesus had an authority unlike anyone else. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, the author concludes, "Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, The crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes. What gave Jesus the authority that Jesus had? That Jesus didn't have degrees, he didn't have training, he didn't have an official position. What gave him an authority that others didn't possess? You get a clue for that in Matthew's gospel when Jesus criticizes the scribes and Pharisees who don't have authority. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus says, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach." The scribes and the Pharisees had no authority because they didn't practice what they preached. That's what distinguished Jesus. Jesus did what he taught. Jesus' walk conformed to his talk. So the man who fasted 40 days and nights and afterwards is famished in the wilderness temptation can say to the devil, "One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." The one who told the devil in that same wilderness temptation, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him," is the one who in the Garden of Gethsemane will later say, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, but not what I want, but what you want." And then Jesus says, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Jesus taught to love God and serve him only. And Jesus did just what he taught. Your will be done. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells his followers, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also." This is the same person who later in the Gospel of Matthew is not going to retaliate against those who come to arrest him. One of his disciples reaches out for a sword and tries to defend Jesus by lopping off the ear of the high priest's slave. And Jesus rebukes that disciple, saying, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you not think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the Scriptures be fulfilled which say it must happen in this way?" No, Jesus chose not to resist evildoers, just as he taught his disciples. His walk conformed to his talk.